Hi, my name is Ann Baxter, and I'm launching this podcast called Back to You. I'm really excited to create a space where I can share with you some stories of hope. You know, I was looking back at my life, and I've always been really fascinated by people sharing their stories. I grew up, my dad was a pastor, and he would take me to some of his nursing home visits with him. And I just remember really loving hearing the stories that were shared in that space. But it wasn't until I was probably in my 20s that I started to recognize that I also had a story to share. And just like you know, my story is made up of millions of smaller stories. But what I started to find is that when I would share my story or stories with people, this was the place where people started to really know me, and the place where I started to really heal and to grow. In sharing my story, I started to recognize that I was connecting dots that I just hadn't connected in the past, and things for me that started to come clear were just really a mystery to me before I started to share my story. And so it's my hope for you that in hearing the stories of the guests that are bravely sharing on Back to You podcast, that you'll start to see that you aren't alone in some of the struggles that you have, and that you'll be encouraged to lean into your own story. I know that this is going to take a lot of courage on your part, because I vividly remember just how much courage it took for me to start to share my story. But I do believe that you have what it takes to step out and just start to share the turning points in your life so that you can start to grow. Years ago, I was sitting on a plane beside an Army colonel, and we got in and sat down and just said hello to each other, and then started to settle in for our flight. And I really honestly thought it was going to be a really quiet plane ride. But as our plane started to take off, I noticed he started to fidget and just look really uncomfortable. And it took me a little bit, but I finally talked myself into leaning over and just asking him if there's anything I could do to help. I just was really surprised that he would have a fear of flying just by how he came across when I first met him. But he honestly seemed really relieved when I opened the door for him to start to share his story. And he ended up sharing with me a story that led to his fear of flying. And I just was really honored that he felt safe enough to share. And I listened and asked questions and empathized with him. And after about 15 minutes, he was in a totally different space. Just the panic that he had at the beginning was gone, and he was just in a really good place to be able to make it through the flight. And this is just something that I've seen work so many times, where something feels really big and overwhelming, and then when you share it with somebody safe, it loses the fuel that it has and the hold, that it has in your life. Personally, for me, one of the big turning points in my life was when I was 8 months pregnant with our fourth, my son, Jack, and I had the opportunity to attend a conference in California called Ultimate Leadership. I knew multiple people that had already gone to the conference, and that it was just really life-changing for them. And I desperately wanted to grow and just be a part of that conference, but I felt like an imposter to go to a leadership conference when I was in the thick of being at home with my kids. Before I went, I remember rehearsing the response I was going to have when people asked me what I did for a living. It just, I felt so out of place, just even the thought of going and attending the conference. And I remember sharing just the fears that I was having with John. And if you know my husband, you know what one of his pep talks might have been like. And after that, I just decided that I was going to go and I was going to be honest with people about where I was at, and just trust that no one probably cared that I was attending a leadership conference, while I was staying at home with our kids. And looking back, I just realized how much I would have missed out on if I hadn't been willing to just share that story with John if I hadn't been willing to step out of my comfort zone and do something that just felt hard and scary. Another thing that God's been teaching me, and that I just really hope will show up in this space, is that we should just really learn to be kind to ourselves and just use the gifts and talents that God's given us, not only towards the people that we have in our life, but also towards ourselves. And I was recently being led by a facilitator through an exercise that was supposed to help me pinpoint some of my gifts and talents. And as we were working through the exercise, we both started to become aware that I was using the gifts and talents that God had given me outwardly towards the people that He brings into my life, but I wasn't being super intentional to use them towards myself. And, I just really appreciated that insight that He gave me, because now I can be aware of that being a struggle for me, and I can be intentional to make sure I care for myself too. So when I talk about self-care and using it towards myself, this year is just a lot different for me. We have 5 kids who, after 18 years of being at home with at least one of them, they are all in school this year. And I'm just really excited for this new season and asking God, what's next for me? Do you have a second mountain for me to climb? Currently, besides the crazy schedule that comes with having a large family, I manage our Airbnb and have also flipped 8 homes over the past several years. I just really love transformation. It just fuels me to see transformation, whether it's in house flipping or investing in people's lives. My husband, John, and I have been married for 21 years, and all 5 of the kids that we have are both of ours, which I think is pretty uncommon. We didn't plan to have that big of a family, but we did notice that when we would talk to people, they would share that they had wished they'd had, at least one more child. And so what we decided to do is just not make the decision for our family to be complete until we weren't feeling overwhelmed. And so after number 5, we knew that he was definitely the grand finale. And if you know him, you would probably agree. We just really enjoy having a big family. And for me, most of the time, it's equal parts fun and just really overwhelming. But we're so glad that God blessed us in that way. My husband, John, is the executive pastor here in Kansas City at a large multicultural church called Graceway. And if you're not familiar with it, you should definitely check it out. We just love our church. I'm really honored that you're just joining me on this journey of looking for hope in the stories that are shared in this space. And if you are in need of hope today, you definitely are not alone. The hope that is shared here is yours to borrow.